Hello and welcome to the French Watch Collector. Today on the bench we have a vintage chronograph, a Dreffa Chronograph, a vintage Swiss brand, and as you can see, it's a non-runner. I try to push on the chronograph pushers, it doesn't do anything. Try to wind it. So first, let's remove the bracelet, which is not the original bracelet. We can handle the watch much easier than without the bracelet, and see what we have. Let's remove the case back, see the movement. I use a rubber ball. It's a simple tool to remove the case back. And you can see the movement inside is looking quite nice, no dirt. You can see sweets and a serial number on the case back. There is a green gasket all around. It looks quite dry and old, but I don't see any rust or any water damage in the movement. So that's good news. Just going to remove the winding stem, so need to remove a couple of turns from the screw. And I'm just checking there. You can see everything is working. Looks like it's activating, stopping, reset. So yeah, looks like the chronograph hammer and all the hands are working, but for whatever reason, the watch doesn't want to run. Okay, so I remove the winding stem. And now I should be able to get the movement out of the case. Just gently coming out, perfect. Okay, you can see the gasket came out with the movement, so just need to we'll change it. We'll put a brand new one just to make sure the watch will be watertight. There is a case ring which is holding the movement in place. It doesn't move, so like that the movement doesn't move in the case. Just gently removing with a screwdriver blade there. And I will just fit the stem back on the movement, and like that I was able to align the hands. So I protect the dial with a piece of plastic, and I will remove the hand with a Presto tool. It's just a tool that will go underneath the hand and just make them go up and detach from the movement. Just remove the hand and keep them in a box. And for the small hands, I will use a pair of hand lever. I prefer like for the smaller hands. So that's a minute hand from the chronograph, and that's a second hand, the running second hand from the watch. And I will put them with the other hand, so we keep them separated. And to remove the dials, I have to unscrew like these dial fit screws, which are in the middle of the movement. Just remove, like do a quarter of a turn, and with a pair of carbon tweezers, because the dial is quite in good condition. So I don't want to damage anything, so I use a pair of carbon tweezers just to gently lift the dial and make sure that I don't do any scratches, don't make any scratches on this dial. Perfect. Now we can see the dial side of the movement is in good condition as well. I remove the hour wheel and the cannon pinion with a Presto tool. Okay, so now I've moved back to the other side and start the disassembly. So this is a chronograph mechanism. You can see that there is a lot more parts compared. Oh, there is a spring that just jumped there. Did not go very far. It's a lot more parts than a standard movement. So there I try to remove the coupling yoke with the wheel on it. I remove first all the springs that give some tension into the chronograph movement. So like that, after it's easier to remove the parts without the spring and without the tension. You don't have any risk of parts flying around or getting damaged. Even if you can see there is a screw that just I used too much pressure on my tweezer and just flew away. And on the chronograph, I always use the same technique. Is I remove the screw, I remove the parts, and I put the screw back on the case, on the movement, sorry, just to make sure that I don't mix them up. Yeah. So there is a chronograph bridge, which is a bit tight to remove. So I will just use a screwdriver blade because I don't want to break the pivot of the wheel underneath, which are the central second wheel from the chronograph and the minute wheel. You can see there is 2 joules on this bridge. Okay, that's a hammer, and yeah, there is one wheel I just jumped because there is a spring underneath. So the chronograph wheel, and that's a minute wheel underneath, but I cannot remove it because the hammer is on the top. So let's first remove 2 screws and the hammer, which is linked with the cam, and after I can remove the minute wheel. Okay, so there is a arm there with a wheel, which is like kind of an intermediate wheel for the minute wheel. And I remove like the operating lever from the chronograph mechanism, which is in 2 parts. There is another one underneath. And basically we are done with the chronograph mechanism, removing all the parts. And the last one, I use these tools, you can see there, to pull out the chronograph driving wheel, which is friction mounted on a pivot there. So I have to use this special presso tool to remove it. Okay, now I'm going to remove the balance wheel. So again, yeah, use a bit of a screwdriver just to remove it, and just be very gentle because it's a very fragile part. Looks like, you see, it's quite stuck there. Maybe there is some dried up oil or grease inside the pivot of the top joule, because the hairspring and the rest of the balance is looking quite good. I tried to remove the power there, but by leaving like trying to lift the spring there, but it doesn't do anything. So I will use another technique. I will put an oiler there through the central wheel, and I will remove the pallet fork cock and the pallet fork. So that's a pallet fork cock there. It's quite hard to remove. So again, I will use a screwdriver there just to lift it up gently, because yeah, you don't want to damage the pivot from the pallet fork. Okay, there it looks like it's freed, so I can use a pair of tweezers to remove it now. I take out the pallet fork, and you can see there it wanted to unwind, but the oiler blocked it, and when I remove the oiler, now the power is going out slowly, and the movement is spinning freely. So it means there is nothing wrong in the movement, because you can see there is turning. So the mainspring is probably good, because you can see it's stored some power. The train of wheel is turning, so maybe a bit of friction, but looks like it was something keeping up the balance, like stuck on a top pivot. So far I didn't see anything wrong. So just checking off for end check on the wheel, see if there is too much play, but it looks good. So far so good on the movement. So now I will remove the train of wheel is held in place by 2 bridges. So that's the first one, the small one, which is you see has 2 joules. So you will have the escape and 1 wheel from the train of wheel underneath. So I just take out the escape wheel, and the second one doesn't come out because he has extended pivot, so I cannot take it out. I need to remove this bridge first, which is kept in place with 2 screws. The first one, and the second one is on the other side. Okay, and I will just gently, is coming this one quite easily. You can see underneath there is some parts under this bridge that we'll have to disassemble later. And now I have the rest of the train of wheel with the center wheel the third and fourth wheel. There we go. Now all the wheels, was checking the pivot, everything looks good. There is the ratchet wheel which is on top of the mainspring assembly. And so now let's move to the other side to disassemble the other side. So the yoke assembly. So I remove the screw there. Remove the minute wheel. There is a yoke spring there, which is a very strong spring. So I use a plastic stick just to make sure it stays in place, doesn't fly away, and to release the tension. And here we go. As soon as the tension is released, it can come very easily. The yoke. And you can see there is still the clutch. And I will remove like these screws which is holding the rest of the parts in place. And now everything else can come, and all the parts are disassembled from the watch. But there is some sub-assemblies that need to be looked at and still disassembled. Okay, so far so good. I did not see anything wrong or anything very obvious on the watch. So I'm cleaning the jewels there with a bit of pegwood just to remove any dried up oil or grease before the part go to the cleaning machine, so it will be easier to clean in the cleaning machine. Just to make sure I do clean both sides, very important. Just to make sure if you keep some dried up oil or grease on a watch, it will can drop the amplitude, or the watch will not run very accurately. So you want to have the parts as clean as possible, and anything you can remove first before putting a cleaning machine, is best. Okay, I just put back the balance assembly on the main plate. Again, just before putting into the cleaning machine, because that's a safe place to keep the balance assembly. It's a very fragile parts, with especially the air spring, which is very thin and can bend and can get damaged very easily. So here we go, the screw, and now I just put it back. Okay, one sub-assembly that need to be disassembled was on the main bridge, the biggest bridge. There is underneath the crown wheel. So you can see we have like two tiny screws, and the crown wheel, which is in two pieces. You have a centerpiece and a ring around. There we go. So that needs to be disassembled to make sure everything gets clean. And there is this part that which is connected to a spring, so that blocks the when you wind the watch, blocks the mainspring in order that it doesn't unwind. So again, I clean the jewels with a pegwood, and I need to do that on all the jewels of the watch to make sure like we have a good cleaning. Now I will disassemble the mainspring barrel assembly and see if we can see anything wrong with the mainspring. So I will just put a bit of pressure so that the lid just pop out. Just take the lid off, and you can see inside the mainspring is not too dirty. I remove the barrel arbor there, which is in the center there. It's a bit hard because there is a tension around with the mainspring, but looking good. And now I will remove the mainspring out of the barrel assembly, and to make sure it get clean, and we will put it back inside if it's in good shape, obviously. So there you need to be really careful, because yes, there is a lot of tension in this. It's a big spring, So yeah, it happened a couple of times to me. It's like he will unwind and everything will fly away. But yeah, that's why you need to always keep one finger on it when you unwind it, just to make sure it doesn't fly. The mainspring and the part doesn't fly away. And there we go. You can see there the part is quite clean and the mainspring, which is in good shape. So I will reuse it. So I put all the parts in this basket, and this basket will go in the machines that I used to clean. So the first part go into a cleaning solution. Just put a bit of speed there on the motor, and I leave it for 5 minutes to clean in this solution. When the 5 minutes are done, just do a spin just to remove the excess products in the basket. And he will go through two wrenching solutions, so it's the same solution, and it goes 2 times. First in one position, and that's the second one. So again, go through it, a bit of wrenching. Now the parts are clean, and the last step, you need to dry. And we have all the parts now which are clean and dry. Now I just make it spin a bit in order for the basket to cool down a bit. And when it's done, I put all the parts back in a box, and we can start the reassembly of the watch. So the first step will be to clean the jewel on the balance assembly. You remember this was a non-runner, so the watch was not running. And the only thing we could see was, the balance was a bit sticky when I took it out. It was not moving. So I always do a two-stage process on these jewels. So first stage will be to put them in some 1-dip solution just to make sure it gets. So he already went through the cleaning machine, but in a 1-dip it will be a second cleaning, just to make sure he remove anything if there is any oil or grease left on the jewel, it will be gone. So I just put it in 1-dip and just use a bit of Rodico just to go over it and just to remove anything if there is something on the top. And you can actually see it shine when there is nothing on it. And the second step there is another product. I put it into a product that will be used to keep the oil that I'm going to put later in place, that the oil will not move. So there it went into the product. I just put it onto this paper to dry it. And when it's dried, I will just put a bit of oil, some low viscosity oil, right into the middle. And when the oil is in place, I will just put the parts, so the chaton, on top of it. There we go, perfectly centered there. And the drop of oil will be right into the middle of the jewel, and it will stay in place with the product we put. So like that, for sure, the balance assembly will be nicely lubricated and will stay lubricated for a long time. So yeah, that's the top part. And obviously you need to just use a bit of air that just to make sure it's moving and it looks good. Just closing the spring on top of it. And the same process will have to be done on the other side. Okay, so now let's move on to the mainspring barrel assembly. So that's a barrel after being clean. I will use, I have a set, a mainspring winder set from Bergeon. So I'm just checking that I have the right size. I will put the mainspring after being clean into the washing machine onto this tool. And I will just wind it. I will rewind the mainspring because you could see when I took it out, it was in good shape. So it's perfectly fine to reuse it after a good clean. So this tool is just to rewind the mainspring, and when it's fully rewind, I will remove like this lever that is used to rewind. And you will be able to see underneath you have the mainspring. So that's a bit tricky because you don't want the mainspring to pop out and spring out. And here I have the mainspring fully wind inside this tool. So I will just put it aside for now. And I will put a bit of grease, special grease, some 8200 on the bottom. So like that the mainspring will be nicely lubricated. And I will push up the mainspring in place. Perfect. I will use some medium viscosity oil there, where the barrel arbor is going to come, just to make sure it's nicely lubricated and there is no friction. And I will put back the barrel arbor in the hole and with the mainspring fully around. So sometimes it's a bit tight, so you need to move it around until you find the right position. There we go. And when it is, so we just need a gentle last push. And when it is in position, we'll be able to put the lid back on. So, but first, like I did at the bottom, just put some oil there. I put the lid back on. Perfect. And I will use this tool just to close it. So I put the plastic cover on top of it and just basically press to make sure it's fully closed. And we have the mainspring barrel assembly, which is done. So before putting the mainspring barrel assembly, I just put a bit of medium viscosity oil there at the bottom, where it's going to rotate around. And there it's in place. I will just put the movement aside under a cover. And I will focus first, before I carry on the assembly, on the sub-assembly. Remember, it was some parts under the bridge. So before I start assembling the strain of wheel, I will assemble these parts. Put a bit of grease there. And I reassemble the crown wheel. Put a bit of grease. I realize, it's the wrong way around. So I just put it the right way around. Put a bit of oil again. And just put the centerpiece with the two screws. It's important to lubricate the parts here because this is the part that will rotate when you will wind the watch. So it needs to be nicely lubricated, like for two reasons. First, to have a nice feel when you wind the watch, like there is no too much friction. And secondly, like if there is no lubrication, the parts will wear very quickly and basically will be damaged, and you will have to replace them and find new parts. And on these vintage watches, sometimes can be difficult or can be expensive to find some vintage parts. So there, to put the part there, I have to put a bit of tension in the spring. And with my other hand, so sometimes it's a bit tricky, I have to use another tweezers to put the part in place. And when it is, I can release the tension there on the part. And when it's done, I will just put back the screw just to make sure everything stays in place. So that's it, we are done, just checking. You can see the tension there, perfect. So we are done with the sub-assembly there, and the last touch is just to add a bit of oil there on a contact point. I will do a coating as well, like we did on a jewel from the balance assembly. I will do the coating on the pallet fork and the escape wheel. Same there, because we will oil them later, and we just want to make sure the oil stay at the right point where we put it. So I use a bit of product for that. And when it's done, I just cleaning the pivot because I want to remove the product from the pivot point there with a bit of wood. Okay, so let's carry on the reassembly with the ratchet wheel. Put a bit of foil there where I'm going to put a screw. And I'll start to reassemble the train of wheel. So you can see there as well at the bottom under my tweezer, you can see it's the movement. It's Landeron 151. So a vintage movement, which is like probably from the, I will date this watch maybe from the 70s. So it's not very old, but yeah, it's a movement which is not made anymore. But you can see this one is actually quite in good shape. And it is quite a simple movement from Chronograph. It's not a high-end movement. You can see already it's a cam operated chronograph. So it's not like the best movement if you want for a chronograph. But I think they are quite easy and reliable movement. And you see, I'm a hobbyist, so I'm not a professional, and I can disassemble and I can maintain this movement quite easily with the knowledge I have. Maybe it's not the best way to do it, but obviously we'll see at the end what's the result, because you remember the watch was not running. So let's see. It'll be very interesting to see the result I'm able to get on the watch. Okay, so there I put the bridges back on, and now I try to center the wheel in the jewel. I use a bit of pegwood there just to make sure I keep everything in place while I drop the screw, and I will screw it down. So one is done. I put the second one. And it was 2 screws as well on this big plate there. So same thing, keep it in place with a piece of pegwood and just screw it. And you can see there when I'm rotating the mainspring, everything is moving. So all good on a train side. Now let's move to the other side. So first, put a bit of grease there on the wheel. Just move around. Just put a bit of grease there because that's a wheel that we see a lot of frictions when you wind the watch or when you set the time. So you just need to drop it in the groove. Just put the clutch in place. You can see there is a one side, yeah, up, it went into it. Just put a bit of grease there as well on the winding stem. And when it's done, I just put the winding stem through everything. And this part is connected to the other side with a screw. So I did not film it, but yeah, you have to hold the part and screw it from the other side. So that's a bit tricky to do it. I put a bit of oil, yeah, some medium viscosity oil on all the pivot point there. And when it's done, I put the yoke in place. Put a bit of grease on the contact point. And I put the yoke spring back in place. So same way when we disassemble it, I use a plastic stick to keep it in place because it can fly. And you can see there it's quite strong and put a lot of tension on the yoke. Okay, now I can reassemble the rest. Put the cannon pinion. And the minute wheel. So looking good on this side as well. And the last parts. So this plate which has a arm which is acting as a spring. I just put the 2 screws which keep it in place. It's quite simple. You can see on this side there is not many parts. On other chronograph you will have the hour side with more parts. This chronograph only have a minute sub counter. It doesn't have a hour counter, so there is a lot less parts. It's less complicated. So now let's move back to the chronograph side, and we are going to put the pallet fork. So I'm just checking if everything looks good, if it's clean. Just put it in position. Yeah, you can see there it's in a joule. It's moving left and right around this axis. And I can put the pallet fork cock on top of it. So again, I will use a pegwood there just to keep it in place and just gently move it until it falls into the joule. You can see there it's rocking around. It's not yet in place. And now, yeah, perfect. You can see it's rocking. And when it's done, I put the screw in place. I put a bit of tension in the mainspring, and you can see there it's moving left and right. So it means that the train of wheel is transmitting the power. Now I'm greasing the pallet fork with automatic oiler. It's quite a tricky operation. So you put a drop of oil on 1 joule of the fork, and you make it move left, right, like 5 times, and you do it again. Put a bit of oil, make it move 5 times until you do it 3 times, around 3 times, and until you oil all the arm from the wheel, for the escape wheel. And now when it's done, when everything is oiled, I can put the balance assembly. And now we will have the verdict to see if the watch is running or not. Okay, wow, it went straight away. You see first, the balance was not fully centered, and you can see there is still not fully centered. But as soon as he fall into position in the joules, he's moving, and you can see that he's beating quite nicely. With visually, you can see like the amplitude is good. I oiled as well. I don't do it under camera because I do it under the microscope. I oiled all the joules from both sides from the train of wheel. And you can see the movement there is beating very well. So now I will start to reassemble the chronograph mechanism. So basically I do it the opposite way of when I disassemble it. So I start by the end of the disassembly, if you want. So that's why it's quite practical as well to film. If you start like me, if you do this as an hobby, you're not a professional. You, especially at the beginning, you don't know the movements, you don't know how it works, or you don't understand everything how it works. So you don't know how the parts are going together. So obviously, if you film, if you make a movie of your disassembly, you can reuse it when you do the assembly. After a while, after you do a couple of watch, like normal watch without complication, you do a watch with a calendar complication, you do a chronograph, you will see a lot of similarity. So it will be easier. Like you will need less to go back to your videos, but it's always nice to have a video if you have any question, or if you don't remember, or if you are not sure about the parts, or you need to set it up. It's nice to have the video and you can go back and refer to it. Okay, so I started to put like the first parts, and you can see there I'm greasing all the points that will come in contact between the parts with some grease. That's a minute wheel, so I'm putting back the minute wheel. And you can see there on top of the minute wheel this gray parts which is attached to it, which is a cam. So I'm oiling the cam there. So that's a cam. That's the part that will be used to reset when you want to reset the chronograph. You will have a hammer that hit the cam and reset the wheel to the same point every time, so to 0. That's a hammer. You can see that with the flat hand on both sides, that will come and hit the minute and the second wheel from the chronograph to reset it. So just put it in place there with the cam. just put back the screws. So that's kept in place with 2 screws. I really like, I have to say, Chronograph. I'm very passionate about Chronograph because first I like the look, and I'm a huge fan of mechanical sports, and Chronograph obviously have huge parts and a huge history with mechanical with race with motorsports. So I love these pieces, and I love to work on Chronograph. It's a bit more complicated. There is a lot of parts. There is a lot of setup as well that you need, a lot of tweaking that you need to do. More tweaking if you want compared to a normal watch that you can do to have a good running chronograph. And I even on the mechanism, I like the look of the mechanism. You can see there with these gold wheels. I mean gold color wheels. It's looking so nice. And when it works as well, when you make it run, like start, stop, reset, and you can see all the parts moving. Yeah, it's even nicer than a normal movement. So I really like to and love to work on this mechanism. Okay, so I carry on with the assembly there, putting back some of the spring, some of the arms there. So that's operating arms. That's will be directly connected to the pushers. You can see I'm putting oils as well on the screws because these screws have a shoulder where the arm is going to rotate around. So now I'm putting the chronograph wheel. So I put it on and use this set to press it in place because it's friction mounted on a top pivot. And using this assembly with the coupling yoke and the wheel on it. So first I put some oil on the screws there that's going to rotate around. And basically this assembly will rotate and will do, you can see the wheel is coming in contact with the chronograph wheel, which is always spinning there. You can already see it spinning. It's directly connected to the train of wheel underneath. And you can see there now the second wheel is spinning as well. And this will rock and rotate around and connect to the chronograph or disconnect the chronograph. So that's why when you start and stop the chronograph, we make the connection between the timekeeping element of the watch and the chronograph. So now I carry on, I put the spring and putting some grease there where the spring is coming in contact with the cam. Putting another spring. So we keep the tension in the operating lever. And the last one, that's the spring that come on the coupling yoke to keep tension in the coupling yoke. I grease the same technique. I put a bit of grease there on a contact point, and now we can check the mechanism. So you can see there I started. It's already started actually. You can see there the wheel in the center is turning. Now I'm decoupling it. It's not turning. Engaging it again. Disengaging and resetting. You can see the hammer there when to hit the wheels to reset the wheel. So the chronograph is working. So now we move back to the dial side. I put the hour wheel there and we can put the dial back. I give it a quick clean as well. I did not film it, but with a swab and a bit of water. So if you like the video, it will be very great if you can subscribe to my channel to support me. As I say, I do this as a hobby, so it takes me a lot of time to do this video and share it with you. So please, if you like it, just subscribe. There will be many more videos to come on interesting watches. Okay, so now the dial is on. I will set the hand. So first I put the hour hand. Just use this tool to press it in place. When our hand is on, I will put the minute hand. I always align them, you can see, to midnight. Just press it in place. Just do a quick check there to see if everything is aligned. So when it's at an hour, you can see 9 o'clock there. Yeah, it's perfectly at 12. Looks like they are aligned perfectly. And when it's at 12, perfect. I put the second hand there from the running second hand. So that's not the second hand from the chronograph, but second hand from the timekeeping if you want. It's never stop running. That's a minute hand from the chronograph. So I reset the chronograph, and now I will put the minute hand perfectly to 0. And when it's on, perfectly to 0, I will just set it again with the tool, just press it in place. Perfect. And now the last one is the central second hand from the chronograph. So again, align it to 12 and just press it in place. Perfect. So now let's focus on the case. You can see the glass is moving and it's quite scratched. So the glass is not the correct size because it's moving. So let's get rid of it and we put a new one. I will disassemble the pushers just to clean them. I will put everything into in ultrasonic machine just to remove the dirt and just to make sure it's look as new as possible and remove any dirt which can be trapped into the pushers. There we go. Just remove these screws. And I can take the pusher out, and inside the pusher you have a small spring. So we clean all these parts into the ultrasonic machine. We do exactly the same thing on the other side, sorry. Just unscrew it. So this screw is what we come and push operating lever when you push the pusher. Okay, so that's the second one. Perfect. So now after going through the cleaning machine, the ultrasonic machine, I will put a bit of grease there in the pusher. That's to make sure it's not really watertight, like this chronograph are not really watertight, but the grease will help, will prevent some water to go through it. It's always good. And obviously the grease as well will help when you push a pusher. It will be like more fluid if you want. So I put back the spring in place in the pusher, and I just do the reverse operation. Just put the pusher on the case, keep it under pressure, and just put the screw from the other side. And we have a new pusher assemble. I do exactly the same operation on the other side. You can see there the case as well is a bit worn, like the plating is a bit off. I'm not yet mastering the gold plating, but I'm working on it. So you will see in maybe some future video some replating, which I'm playing right now with. So as soon as I'm feeling confident, I will do a watch where we do the replating. So I put a brand new crystal. So I use a special tool, like a version tool as well, to push a crystal in place. Put the crystal on a case, use a plastic to protect it, and I put a bit of pressure and up. You can see it went down. It's in place with a brand new crystal. I give a quick buff of air on the dial to remove any dust. And here we go. I just put a clean case with the brand new crystal, and the watch you can see straight away has a very different look. When the crystal as well, when you change the crystal, it's like you give a huge difference to a watch if it was an old crystal which was a scratch. I put a winding stem, just put the screw it back, put the movement ring around, just to make sure like that the movement doesn't move. You can see the movement was quite nice, but now it's even nicer. You remember it was a green gasket, like very dried up old gasket. So now I put a new one, but first I'm going to put some grease. I use this little box to put grease on the gasket. There we go. Now it's fully greased. I will just pull it around, and that when we put the case back, it will be fully sealed, and it will prevent from having any water. So it's not a diver watch, and you don't go to the swimming pool with it, and especially with vintage pieces. But yeah, it will prevent some water, for example, when if you wash your hand or anything like that, you prevent from water from going inside and creating some rust and damage to the movement. So I put back the case back. So I will, you can see the case back as well. I put it through the ultrasonic machine. I will just use a rubber ball to close it from now, and after I will close it properly. And you can see now the result. You can see the watch is running quite nicely with a nice amplitude of above 300 degrees. So that's quite high, and that's very good. The bit error is, I'm quite happy at 0.5. And you can see the watch is gaining few seconds or losing few seconds a day. It's around 0. So it's perfect for me for a non-running watch. I'm pretty pleased with the result. And here you can see the chronograph running at high speed. I'm pretty pleased with the restoration on this watch. The case is looking nice, the dial is amazing, and as you saw just before, the watch is very accurate. So thank you for watching this video with me and staying along. There will be many more watches to come on this channel, so thank you and see you next time. Bye bye.